see just how competitive the Central Division was this past year. It really came right down to what ended up being the pause between the Blues and the Avalanche to decide who won the division, and the Stars ended up being your Western Conference champs. So there is a ton of talent here, but let's start as we look at the Central Division with the Winnipeg Jets and Nate Thompson's new team. So we just heard yesterday Mark Scheifele is 100%, which is great news, too, if you're a Jets fan. Where do you see this team in terms of a competitive level going forward?
Yeah, I think they've had a full year really to adjust. And if you go back a step or so in time, remember, this is a club that really had their blue line decimated the mind as well. And I think this group is starting to adjust. I think Nate Thompson makes great sense for the following reason. This is a well-traveled NHLer, but a guy with, average skill set has really, carved out a career for himself because he fills gaps and he can play in a variety of spaces up and down your roster, and I think brings a real character, a real sense of this is what maturity and life in professional hockey is all about. He will have an impact on the line A's of this roster, the Pionks of this roster, who are still trying to figure out what life in the NHL and what consistency looks like from one day to the next. So I think an important step forward, for the Winnipeg Jets this year. I would not be surprised for them to add on what they accomplished last year and compete for one of those top spots in the West.
Yeah, and they already have one of the best goalies in the game in Connor Hellebuck. So if he can continue to do what he's done.
Proved his worth last year, did he not?
Did.
Yeah.
Let's move elsewhere in the Central and talk about the Nashville Predators, your home in Nashville currently. What do you think about them and the moves they've made or maybe have yet to make before things are settled?
Well, that's the thing, and I think that needs to be kind of a disclaimer or qualifier where most of our analysis as to these teams really takes place, because the market really, with the cap restraints and that kind of abundance of quality players still on the market, there is still space, opportunity for clubs like Nashville to perhaps make some different changes. For me, I don't know that Nashville has done much to, at least on paper, Jamie, make themselves better. And remember, this is a group over the past that has really struggled to score with regularity up front. And I think that struggle probably is heightened with the subtraction of guys like Granlund and Craig Smith. If I'm not mistaken, Craig Smith has been a four-time 20-goal scorer over the course of his 5 years in Nashville. That'll be hard to replace. Borowiecki, I think, makes great sense on the blue line, brings a lot of grit, brings a lot of that, that solid NHL presence, a very, plays a physical brand of hockey. I think that's a nice add. Beyond that, I think what this club lacks is some punch where the offensive part of the forward core is concerned.
Now we move on to the team that just surprised a lot of people, didn't surprise themselves, and went out and won the Western Conference, went all the way to the Stanley Cup final. Now we know that they are going to be without some key pieces whenever the NHL season does start. Tyler Seguin, Ben Bishop out 5 months each. So where are the Stars at?
Well, here's the interesting part about that. I mean, so Tyler Seguin, we now know, was banged up for much of the postseason last time around. Ben Bishop, even more prominently or obviously, was out of the mix over that hip tear that he had kind of underwent over the course of this offseason. And those are two guys that you think, if healthy, if part of the mix, what would the future look like, or what may Dallas have actually accomplished with two of their signature pieces in the mix? And they're going to have to kind of deal with that going forward. So it won't surprise me, and you and I have had this conversation on this program at an earlier time, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Dallas goes out and makes an attempt. I'm sure they're knocking on the door already. Somebody like an Athanasiou or perhaps a Mike Hoffman, if they can find a way to make that fit. Goal scoring production up front will be a key for them as well.
Okay, well, besides Dallas, I think the other two real players in this division in terms of trying to contend and win the division and maybe more, the Colorado Avalanche and the St. Louis Blues. So really quickly, for each of those teams, starting with the Avalanche, what's their ceiling? Do you see them as an immediate favorite to contend for the Stanley Cup?
Given the mix of the Central Division, for me, I kind of put some, I put quotations or an asterisk around the Colorado Avalanche. This was a really strong team, badly banged up at a critical moment last year. I think it was in them to go far deeper than they did. So, one, if they're healthy, and two, with the addition of Taves on the back end and Saad up front, I think this is a talented group in practice and on paper that probably made themselves better with respect to this offseason. So, yes, for me, I have expectations that the Avs will add more.
Yeah, they took them to Game 7 against the Dallas Stars, and they eventually fell. Meanwhile, the St. Louis Blues, the defending champs at the time, didn't even make it out of the first round this year in the return to play. So what do you see in terms of their future?
Yeah, I think the Blues really, if you just look at it, isolate on really one simple transaction, having pulled Alex Pietrangelo out of the mix and now substitute in a Torrey Krug, I think you're getting a very similar players in that respect. And I don't expect to see much of a void having lost a top four defender in Alex Pietrangelo. So for me, if you go back 2 years in time, Blues, who were right there at the top of the mountain and won it all in the Stanley Cup championship, a disappointment last year. To me, this group is substantially intact, and that window is still wide open for them to replicate that. I think they're a team that comes back, not so much have improved themselves on paper, but learned a bitter lesson and probably apply that lesson to go on and compete for one of the top spots on the Western side in the coming season.